Good morning, everybody. It's about 7:30 a.m. West Coast time on Saturday, April 19th. A complicated date in American history. I'll do a separate video about that. I'm going to start this video off by saying something that I don't get to say very often over the last several years. Good news out of the United States Supreme Court. In an incredibly rare thing, the United States Supreme Court issued a ruling last night about 1 p.m. Eastern time, blocking the Trump administration from deporting Venezuelan immigrants who were being held in northern Texas. It was an emergency application from the ACLU. The Supreme Court temporarily blocked the Trump administration early Saturday morning from deporting another group of Venezuelan migrants accused of being gang members under the expansive powers of the Alien Enemies Act. Quote, the government is directed not to remove any member of the putative class of detainees, those being held in northern Texas, from the United States until further order of this court, the Supreme Court. The court said in a brief unsigned order that gave no reasoning, as is typical in emergency cases. Two Supreme Court justices dissented in this decision. Anybody want to guess who they are? Shocker, Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. The White House did not issue an immediate response. More than 50 Venezuelans were scheduled to be flown out of the country, presumably to El Salvador, from an immigration detention center in Anson, Texas. The ACLU in recent days had already secured orders barring similar deportations under the Alien Enemies Act in other places, including New York, Denver, and Brownsville, Texas. The situation in Anson, Texas, was urgent enough that the ACLU lawyers mounted challenges in 3 different courts within 5 hours on Friday. The lawyers then filed an emergency petition to the Supreme Court asking the justices to step in and issue an immediate pause on any deportations because many of the Venezuelan men had already been loaded onto buses, presumably headed to the airport. I was watching that last night. They showed a bus leave this detention facility. You know, I think I was watching Chris Hayes. They showed it live. A bus and 2 minivans left this facility. They were trailed by police cars, and then it turned around and went back to the same facility. These men were close to spending their lives in a horrific foreign prison without ever having had any due process, said Lee Gelernt, G-E-L-E-R-N-T, the lead ACLU attorney on the case. This guy is a hero. Lee Gelernt, G-E-L-E-R-N-T. This case has a long way to go, but for now, we are relieved that the court has not allowed the Trump administration to hurry them away in secret. There was another Supreme Court ruling last week that complicated all of these efforts for the ACLU. The efforts by groups like the ACLU to stop deportations under the act were complicated this month by a Supreme Court ruling that found that anyone subject to removal under the Alien Enemies Act needed to be given the opportunity to challenge their removal, but only in the places where they were being detained, which means that a judge in Washington, D.C. can't issue a blanket injunction against any deportations that would apply nationwide. We saw that play out yesterday afternoon in a hearing Friday in front of Judge James Boasberg, who originally a month ago issued orders against the Trump administration, those initial first three flights to El Salvador, which the Trump administration ignored that order. During a hearing on Friday evening in front of Judge Boasberg, Lee Gelernt from the ACLU said that he was prepared to file what amounted to preemptive lawsuits in all of the more than 90 federal judicial districts across the country in an effort to ensure that no Venezuelan migrants were deported without hearings under the Alien Enemies Act. And now he has a United States Supreme Court decision that he can attach to every one of those motions. This part I love. Drew Ensign, a lawyer for the Justice Department, gave his word that no flights were scheduled to depart from the Bluebonnet Detention Center in Anson, Texas, on either Friday night or Saturday morning, adding that migrants there would be given at least 24 hours notice before they were deported. Now, the notice that these guys were given was deficient. It didn't advise them of their rights. Most of them only speak Spanish, and the notices were in English. But Judge Boasberg was somewhat skeptical of Mr. Ensign's assertion, pointing out that the notice forms from the government had given to the Venezuelan men did not contain an explicit statement that they were able to challenge their deportations or how to do that. Because the DOJ violated his order against those flights taking off on March 15th, Judge Boasberg this week found that there is probable cause for him to hold the government in contempt of court. But yesterday, Friday, he declined to issue a new order because of that order from the Supreme Court, saying that these guys who were in Texas had to challenge their detention in Texas, which the ACLU did on their behalf. And that led to this order we got from the Supreme Court. The latest iteration of the fight over the use of the Alien Enemies Act began on Wednesday, when the ACLU filed a lawsuit in Abilene, Texas, on behalf of 2 Venezuelan migrants being held at the Bluebonnet facility, asking a judge to shield them against deportation. But that judge denied the request, largely because lawyers from the DOJ had told him that those 2 specific men had not yet been scheduled for removal from the United States. But then on Friday, other Venezuelan migrants at the detention center were informed that they were facing imminent deportation. Some of them got less than 12 hours notice, and that notice they received was in English, and it was deficient. One of them, initials FGM, was instructed to sign a removal waiver in English, even though he speaks only Spanish. He refused to sign it. Immigration officers told him the waiver was coming from the president, according to court papers, and that he will be deported even if he did not sign it. I want all of these deportation officers, these ICE officers, these CBP officers, I want their names and photos plastered all over the internet so we can know who they are, who these guys are taking such great pleasure in treating these people this way. Among those held at the detention center in Texas that the ACLU is seeking to protect from deportation is a 19-year-old young man. His initials are YSM. YSM, court papers say, was arrested by immigration agents on March 14th and sent to the detention center in Texas this week. When the agents initially questioned him, they told him they used a photograph from Facebook that showed him in the presence of another person holding a gun. And they said that proved that YSM was a member of the Venezuelan street gang Tren de Aragua. He was holding a squirt gun. It was a water pistol. It was a squirt gun. That's the government's proof. That's why the government doesn't want any due process hearings on Kilmar Abrego Garcia, because this is the kind of evidence that they have. He was holding a squirt gun. Since March 15th, the administration has sent 5 flights carrying deportees to El Salvador under a deal with its president, Bukele, to hold detainees deemed by U.S. authorities to be part of criminal gangs in his country's prison for a fee. They have never given any of these guys a hearing. The government has never proved in court that any of these guys is a member of any gang. MAGA, if you guys want to do this, do it legally. Hold a hearing. If the government has evidence that these guys are gang members, hold a hearing and let the government prove that. I don't know why you guys are so absolutely terrified of the government having to prove in court that these guys are gang members. Right.